Bureaucrats attempt to ban plastic bags and bake sales. Is our freedom being eroded one delicious sugar-laced muffin at a time? I'm Allen Barton. Stand by for Front Page. Joining me in studio, Don Watkins, a fellow at the Ayn Rand Center for Individual Rights, and Terry Jones, associate editor for Investors Business Daily. All right, in Massachusetts, my old home state, the Department of Public Health and Education was about to outlaw bake sales in public schools. This is part of a fight against the obesity epidemic. This was going to start in August. Then public outcry caused the legislature to overturn the ban on bake sales. Let's watch a local radio host defend the policy.
The reason this makes sense is because you guys know I was a little fat kid. A third of our kids are obese. Somebody's going to do something about it. Parents are complaining, but parents have failed the test, so the schools are stepping in. I love it.
Well, actually, in brief, he hits exactly what it is. Parents have failed the test, so the schools should step in. What do you think, Terry? What's wrong with this?
Well, let's start off with this guy said he was a little fat kid. Mm-hmm. Well, he's still a fat head. This is a really, really dumb idea. The notion that somehow if you control bake sales, you'll put a dent in obesity. Obesity, if you look at data, obesity correlates very strongly to one thing: income. Mm-hmm. As income goes up, obesity goes up because caloric intake goes up. Mm-hmm. Has nothing to do with school bake sales. Curbing school bake sales will do nothing other than make schools suffer. Mm-hmm. And I think the Massachusetts legislature got wind of this, and when they saw that people were ticked off and the schools were ticked off, they thought better of it, and they retracted the policy.
Well, Don, I mean, you do have public schools, and I'm sure there's plenty of argument to be made like we should just take education out of the public realm. But then within the public schools, you then say, well, if you're going to have public schools, they have to feed the kids. And if they have to feed the kids, they should feed them more nutritiously. That's what this was part of, was banning high caloric foods within the hours of like 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. on these schools. Unfortunately, that edict covered bake sales. So why shouldn't the government, if they're going to provide the education on the taxpayer's dime, say, listen, you're going to provide some nutritious food so we don't have to pay for the health costs that these kids incur by eating crappy food?
Well, I mean, that's the very kind of impossible situations created by government monopolizing an industry, particularly monopolizing an industry that houses our kids for 6 hours a day. Now, I think it's much more worrisome what they put in the kid's mind than what they put in the kid's stomach. But nonetheless, insofar as the government's going to control the schools, yeah, they have to control what the children eat. But that should be a real worrisome issue, because if you actually look at what government findings on nutrition are, they're a disaster. They've been a disaster for years, and they're arguably responsible for what made us obese in the first place. I mean, there's people who will make arguments that the government's food pyramid, they threw that away and they made it some other shape now.
An octagon.
Yeah.
It's a inverted trapezoid or something. I don't know.
Yeah. What you need is parents to decide.
Object. It's four-dimensional. You have to really, it only exists on the web.
I mean, parents, let them decide what kind of diet their kids are going to have. But even if you think maybe they shouldn't be serving kids meals during the day that have cookies or whatnot, this is a bake sale. It's to raise money for the kids to do stuff. What are you going to have, a broccoli sale?
Yeah. It's not going to raise a lot of money to have a broccoli sale. All right, Terry, in terms of economic ramifications of this kind of thing, the Los Angeles City Council is set to ban plastic bags. Now you can go, this is a good thing, because plastic bags, they can get into the environment, there's garbage all over the place, and people can bring their own paper bags and recycle, or they can bring those little sort of hemp bags or whatever, and isn't this a good action to help clean it all up?
In a word, no.
Why not? Come on.
There are a number of things here that are really irksome. First off, I already live under the plastic bag ban. I live in non-Los Angeles, Los Angeles County, mm-hmm. where they tried out the plastic bag ban first, and it's terrible. Mm-hmm. You have to.
How do you get away? So tell us the mechanics. What do you do?
You have to go to, when you go to the store.
Yeah.
you have to bring your own bags. And if you don't,
they don't give you paper bags. The paper bags are out too.
No, they do give you paper bags, but in many stores they've now replaced the old nice paper bags with handles and very sturdy with these very thin, cruddy bags, and they charge you a dime for each bag. So what they once handed out, as part of their grocery service, now you get charged for. But what's worse here is this plastic bag ban. Plastic is a very minor part of our litter, and as they did a study up in San Francisco where this similar bag ban went into effect in 2007, and they found that there was no change in the amount of plastic in the public litter as a result of the bag ban. So it was totally ineffectual. It didn't result in a diminished use of plastic, and as far as we can tell, did nothing other than annoy people.
All right, Don, let's take a look at a video. It's going to give some insight into the LA City Council's thinking.
So if we were here 100 years ago, would we be saying we must not produce automobiles because buggies and buggy whips manufacturers won't have jobs anymore? Of course we would.
So what's the analogy there in terms of this idea of like trying to inhibit some industry because of its perceived negative effects?
Well, what they're saying is basically one of the arguments against these bans has been, well, you'll lose jobs in the plastic industry, and he's saying, well, hey, you lose jobs whenever you have innovation. But this isn't innovation. This is banning something that is provably beneficial to human life. It is beneficial that I can get a cheap, disposable form to carry my groceries. And I mean, these bans then are complete violations. And if you argue, well, they can turn into litter and therefore we should be able to ban them, first of all, they're recyclable. But second of all, you need a human standard, and the human standard is that this is a net benefit to human life. The fact that we have waste and can remove it that's a great thing.
Well, let me challenge you there, because it was reportedly recently that there's this Great Pacific garbage patch. There's this huge amount of garbage floating out in the Pacific that gets concentrated in a certain area because of the various tidal flows and currents and stuff like that. It's increased 100-fold. Over the last 40 years. It's a gigantic Texas-sized bunch of plastic and garbage, and it's altering the biodiversity out there. Isn't this something where you say, okay, here's a net effect here on the environment, which will eventually affect humans negatively? There's no way that that thing is good for anybody sitting out there the size of Texas and the Pacific. Isn't this a reason for a government, as the only entity that can go and look and say, like, hey, we got to clean that up? It would be a challenge for the U.S. Navy to try to clean this up at this point, where private industry will never make that decision to say, there's a Texas-sized pile of garbage out where, has nothing to do with us. Yeah. Over to you.
Well, two things. One is this notion that it's a Texas-sized, basic garbage sump in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That has been challenged. I read of a study several weeks ago that said it's not the size of Texas. That's a lot of baloney. There is a substantial area there where the currents circle around, where there has been some detritus that has ended up. And that has always been the case, by the way. Even when humans weren't here, there was stuff that came from the shores that ended up there in the middle. But the other thing is, if you want plastic not to get into the ocean, if that's the issue, the place to stop it is at the shore. And we have here in Los Angeles, we have all sorts of ineffectual ways of treating sewage that let massive amounts of junk get into the ocean, and they don't stop it in any way. They spend their money on other things. But that's probably the best way to solve that. But certainly getting rid of plastics and putting a total ban on plastics is not the way to go.
Don, what about my sort of question to Terry? Like when you have a large ecological sort of disaster, whether it's the size of Texas or it's the size of Delaware, and there's really no single private entity that can take responsibility for it, nor has any interest. Isn't this a place where government can step in, and isn't the plastic ban a part of stepping in?
Well, I mean, to the extent that there's a problem, it's that there's not private property here. I mean, the whole way that you solve these kinds of problems in a society is that you have private property, and if one person dumps something on another person's property, the law steps in to benefit that. But we have what economists would call tragedy of the commons. Nobody owns it, so nobody has a vested interest in taking care of it. So I think that's to the extent there's a problem. But I would question, is there even a problem? So it's true that one side effect of human activity is that you have to take trash, that there's waste, and you want to remove that and put it to trash sites. I mean, until you really show that this is a fundamental impingement upon human welfare, then, I mean, I would be open to the argument that this is just a trash dump in the middle of the ocean. And there's nothing inherently bad about that when you consider the costs of what would be involved in cleaning it up or preventing it. If those costs make human life worse, then you shouldn't do it.
All right, guys, interesting conversation. For Don and Terry, I'm Allen Barton. You've been watching Front Page.